This is the Domain Magnet Show, where you'll learn everything you need to know about buying, optimizing, and selling online businesses with your host, Michael Beroslavsky. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. We've got Doron Wolffberg here, and he is the head of mergers and acquisitions at yellowHEAD, which is a performance marketing agency, which has taken a turn toward doing more acquisitions as a growth model. So thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear more about how you got into this and what you're working on now.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So let me start by really giving like a brief overview of me and yellowHEAD and how we got into the whole space of doing online acquisitions. So I started at yellowHEAD about 5 years ago, originally in the SEO department, kind of grew from there, from account management to the head of SEO. yellowHEAD's a pretty cool company. We work with big brands from wide industries, so anything from gaming, e-commerce, SaaS, build a really good name for ourselves. We got to the point where the online acquisition space seems like there was a lot going on. And it was also kind of a solution to a problem you have when you run a digital marketing agency, which is the churn. So all your revenue is client-based. So you kind of live and die by that sword. And that fluctuates and you can't really control it. And it's not really something that's more like an asset, so to speak. So at some point, we thought that, okay, so why don't we try this and see how this works, right? Because we have the capability as an operator, right? We know how to do SEO. We know how to run ad campaigns. We have creative resources. We have development resources. We have a lot of talented people that know how to do this stuff. So, why not give this a try? And so in early 2017, bought our very first site from Flippa. It was a recipe site monetized by AdSense. A month later, we also launched our first in-house project to see if we can build something from scratch. And then things have rolled on from there. After building that department in early 2017, we went on growing in deal flow. So far, bought around 17 websites. We have over 20 websites in the portfolio. We managed to sell a few by now. So been going pretty well. I think that's about it. It's kind of like a general overview of things.
Yeah, well, that's really, that's interesting. You guys have gotten up to now 17. You've sold some. What was it like, if you could compare the process and the difficulty and the resources required to acquire a new site or an operating site versus setting up a new product within your company? As you mentioned that you guys tried doing that some years ago.
It's a good question. The difference is that I would say it's relatively more simple to acquire than it is to start a product, or whether it's like a tech product within a company or a new content website for that matter. It's relatively more simple because there's a lot of the setting up stage, the building something from scratch is extremely time consuming in terms of research, in terms of the resources you need to allocate, when building content sites from scratch, for example. I mean, you can't use like a basic WordPress site, WordPress template, use the generic resources that you have online, right, to find content writers, link building. But even that, if you don't have the infrastructure, it still takes a lot of time and effort. And then if you really want to have a good product, so if it's a content site, then like really the content is your product, right? The way it's written, the way it's presented on the site, the way the site performs in terms of technical elements. You have to combine all that to create a really good product, right? To compete, because it's still a very competitive marketplace. So I would say to build a process for that is it's not an easy task. So if I compare it to acquiring a website that's already past that stage, I would say it's a bit more simple from that perspective.
Interesting. And, you guys had this kind of competency on your team already from the content perspective, the SEO perspective. And I would imagine there are a good number of people in the audience who do, but we also have people who are listening who don't necessarily have a lot of experience with content marketing and with SEO. Would you recommend that they look at other business models, and you guys have a preference for content sites because of your competency? Or do you think that it's really the strongest one and they should find people to work with who have that skill set?
So I think it really depends on what kind of skill set you have, your background, and what's interesting to you. Personally, since I kind of led the activity from the get-go, I took it more to the content side vertical because that's what I know. So I come from an SEO background. I feel really confident there. We did try to acquire other businesses like e-com businesses, and we kind of thought, hey, it must be really simple, right? Because we're a marketing agency, so we'll just buy an e-commerce site, and we know how to run Facebook, we know how to run Google Shopping ads, Google search ads. We're so good, like, so let's just do it. And it ended up being a total mess, basically, because running an e-commerce business is much more complex than just the marketing aspect of running e-com, right? There's the logistics side of things, there's the customer support. Even as a marketing agency, just talking, suddenly you have to talk to all the different marketing elements yourself and the dev element yourself. So you're not used to that. You're used to consulting or managing on behalf. So it's a very different story where you're doing it in-house. Not to say that it's not doable, but let's just say that if we were an agency specializing, for example, in FBA marketing, then it would make perfect sense to acquire FBA businesses and run them, assuming, of course, that all the different elements that come along with managing this type of business.
Yeah, certainly makes sense. There are models that are much more hands-on and much more directly engaging with the customers. And I can't remember who said this, but it's one of those kind of terrible quotes. And it said, business would be great if it weren't for all the employees and customers. But ultimately, this is something a person has to decide if they're going to put money into an asset like this, because there are, or at least over the past 5 to 10 years, you would see different ebooks and blog posts out there about make passive income by investing in profitable websites, and it's not really that passive. There are ways of working with a company who will manage it for you, but you're going to give up some of your returns. So you mentioned you guys have 17. What kind of team does that take to keep those running profitably? And also maybe we could hear one of the stories of one that you sold.
Sure. So right now we have a model that's very agile. So in terms of what we have in-house is we have me and another team member, and then we handle everything that has to do with the deal flow, prospecting deals, vetting them, negotiating them, acquiring them, setting up a growth strategy for this site, which means that, and that's something that we've learned with experience now to do before the acquisition, is already have a growth strategy in place. So like kind of look at a website and see, okay, so what kind of investment would it take to just maintain the site at its current revenue levels? And then what kind of investment would it take from our end to grow the site from 1x to 2x to 3x and 4x? And that helps us choose the best acquisition route for that specific business. You might acquire a business that, let's say it's 100K doing 3K a month or so, right? But then it might be such an old website that just updating all the content might have an additional expense of 15 to 20K, whereas maybe if you buy website B, same website but has fresh content, it's works at like an evergreen niche where you don't really have to update the content as much as, let's say, like a tech niche for that matter. And then maintaining that site might not be like an additional $20,000 on content and outreach, might be much less. So that's something that today we do within that stage. And then we outsource everything that has to do with content creation, outreach campaigns and management. Most of the development is outsourced. And then creative, that's kind of easy. We do that stuff in-house because we have the designers, but it's also something kind of that you have to pay attention also how you manage your in-house resources versus external resources, because in-house you kind of use them for clients as well. So you kind of find that balance, and you got to keep track on what you're spending with those team on in-house activities versus like clientele, and make sure that everything operates smoothly.
Yeah. Okay. So there's obviously a challenge, an array of challenges within any given business model, and that's part of the reason. If you're just starting out and you're buying your first sites, try to stick with one that you know, or if you have a partner who really understands the operations or marketing in a certain model, that's good. And venturing out can be a bit dangerous because it's easy to underestimate what it will take to grow and to scale reliably over the course of a year to 2 years, so you can actually either sell it again or recover your principal which you outlaid. Speaking of which, do you guys tend to finance everything out of the cash flow from the SEO business? Is that how you started? Did you have to bring in any other kind of financing options? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so we're not externally funded. All the operation is within the current cash flow. So kind of putting some funds aside to create other growth opportunities for the company, whether it's through acquisition or through developing. There's other cool stuff that going on, developing other SaaS products or other, let's call it like new revenue streams or new growth streams. And this is just one of them.
Okay, that makes sense. So one of the ways that you stay relatively diversified and manage your risk is by having not just these websites, these content sites that produce income, but you also have your service business income, and then you have SaaS income, which I imagine is it subscription based, or you will have that option anyway.
Yeah, it's basically the idea of developing other tools that relate to the marketing activity that hopefully you can later on market as your own product.
That's really interesting. So what are some other strategies or techniques that have worked really well for increasing the cash flow or the traffic post-acquisition?
There's a few things that we do. Some of them are really basic and for example, one of the type of sites that I like to look at is sites that don't have comparison tables above the fold. Usually that's an area where there's a lot of activity that takes place. Readers love to click it, and today you have to be super relevant, right? Especially on mobile with limited attention span of user these days. They want to see relevant content right away. And then I kind of know that if a certain site, it doesn't have like a proper comparison table that's above the fold, doesn't have like proper CTA buttons, I kind of know that's an extra anywhere from 10 to 25% in revenue that I can get just by getting more affiliate clicks. On some niches, I kind of know what are the good CPA opportunities in terms of affiliate offers. So I can see a site that has he has offer X from this certain brand as an affiliate, and I kind of know I can get a better offer since I'm already active in that space. So those, I guess, are some of the things I look for. Another thing is like if I already have a site within one space, I like to acquire another site. I like to bundle them up, and you typically get higher multiples when it's a 2 or 3 site bundle as opposed to just one site. Diversify the risk for the buyer. It's also easier for you to sell them as a bundle. It's kind of less work. You don't have to find multiple buyers for a listing. It's just one. But primarily as a way to get a higher multiple on the listing.
Gotcha. And for your sales process, and you've successfully sold a few out of the portfolio so far. How have you found is the best way to find, a good price in a reasonable amount of time without waiting around with tire kickers for 6 months?
So right now we're mostly selling through external marketplaces. We tried setting up, kind of in the process of setting up our own network where we can also make direct deals. That hasn't matured quite yet. So the thing that I found with, whether it's sourcing direct deals for yourself or whether it's selling for your own network, that normally, so on for this question on the seller side, direct deals, it's kind of hard to find a buyer that would pay a high multiple for a direct deals. Has to be like someone that really, really, really understands, the business. He understands how you operate. He understands, the type of asset you're selling. Otherwise, it's mostly people that are just looking for lower multiples. And there's less competition on your business, right? Because if you're just dealing with one person, there's most of the time there's no real urgency for him to kind of buy it, so he's more in a position of power. So unless you have a really good relationship with someone, unless you have like a really good network with people that already bought for you, I would say that would be a different story. It just takes more time to build. So I personally, where I'm at right now, found it more effective to do it through marketplaces where I can get a higher multiple there. For good listings, there's more competition. So eventually, I would pay the brokerage fee, but eventually that kind of adds up since I can sell at a higher multiple.
Right. Okay. Now that's interesting. And as far as some of the times when it maybe didn't go so well, you'd mentioned there was an e-commerce site that you learned more about how you should have a growth strategy in place beforehand. Was that the one that really stands out, or was there one that was also on the content side where it didn't really pan out and you had to figure out what to do with it?
Yeah, there were definitely. So not every acquisition is or was successful. There was, we talked about the e-commerce side, and that just also in the due diligence phases, if you're not familiar with the content model, it's really hard to spot problems or to verify reports unless you either know it really well or you get someone that really knows how to look at those reports. So that side, there were like a lot of mistakes from the due diligence process to operating the business. I would even say that the biggest expense or loss in terms of that acquisition was just running it for, I think we ran it for another 8 to 10 months, pretty much had a full staff in-house doing that. So just taking a small SMB, especially in the e-commerce space, and operating kind of like a full-time business, or like, basically not the SMB model where you have like a passionate entrepreneur that does everything. So you get a lot of overhead, and I think that was even the biggest expense. We had another issue where, the very first site we bought, it was a recipe site. I think two weeks after we bought it, there was a big update with the way Google was monetizing AdSense. And we just lost like half of the revenue from AdSense 2 weeks within the acquisition. Just kind of found out from different forums and stuff what was going on, that other publishers, were also saying that somehow Google just changed the AdSense algorithm. And then eventually kind of found ways to kind of stabilize the site. But it was never like a case to where, like for that site, I think it's at the range where, we're doing around 5 years. We're at a pace of 5 years return on investment instead of like 2.5 or 3 years. And that's something that you kind of have to take into considerations because, you can buy an Amazon affiliate site and man, they can change your commission structure tomorrow and there's nothing you can do about it, right? You can buy a site that has a specific affiliate program they're working with and there's no real contracts there. That contract, that company can cease to exist next year, and then you have, so there's a lot of kind of learn with time that you got to have a diversified growth strategy for each scenario and different ways that you can kind of grow the website to really fight all these different risks that you have. And the key is just diversification. So like don't have one website, have like enough website where it's like you can feel secure that you kind of know that one out of five websites isn't going to do that well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the better you are as an operator, then the more websites are going to do well. But you kind of always have to assume the worst, that one of your acquisitions isn't going to go well. And
Mm-hmm.
then but as long as you're diversified enough, that's still a very solid and sustainable and profitable business model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've had similar things happen, and the diversification, even within the same business model, you can get different ad networks, different affiliate programs, different niches, different frequencies of publishing. So you've got your evergreen content sites, and then you've got your news type sites where it's constantly changing. And mixing those up can really help, particularly considering that these different updates to Google, they'll happen, some of them more severe than others, and you'll notice that a lot of sites will come onto the market all of a sudden, and you got to be extra careful with those too, because the deals look good, but the due diligence needs to be probably doubly thorough in those times. So you must probably have some stories where things went really well, though. What do you think is your favorite acquisition out of the 17 or so you've done? Which was the one you were most excited about, or maybe it surprised you that it turned out so well, but it's a good story for the audience?
Yeah, okay, cool. I think the second website that we bought, and I think I posted that case study on Empire Flippers. It was a website we bought for, I think it was 51K, and then we flipped it for 135 about 16 months after. During
Nice.
that 16 months, the site made just over 50K in revenue. So we kind of got the whole acquisition back in profits, and were able to flip that one. Got a couple of other case studies also on sites we managed to build from scratch. One of them is also on Empire Flippers. It was in the music space, kind of. It was even the very first project we did internally, ended up being really successful. Invested around an initial investment of it was around 15K in terms of development content, good basis in terms of backlinks. Sold that site 18 months later for 100K. During that time, the site made just over $55,000 in
Nice.
revenue. Yeah. And I think that's like the biggest upside, where you're also the operator. So all those additional costs in terms of man hour that you had, to pay some other third party, to do that for you. Once that's in-house, that's a lot more flexible on how you allocate those hours. So
Yeah.
that turned out to be a very successful model for us.
Yeah, that's really good. If you can put them together, if you can put together sites or products within your team in parallel to doing acquisitions, you'll find that there's a lot of upside there for you as well. So that's a pretty fascinating way to turn things around with the competency you already have from within your team. So if you're listening now and you're in the audience and wondering, how should I approach this? I haven't done an acquisition yet. Then really do look at your own skill sets and the skill sets of people that you can or do regularly partner with, and apply that when you go into it, and make sure that you do your due diligence, so that you go as far as having a plan for growing whatever it is that you buy. So what do you think is next for you and yellowHEAD in 2020? We still got a lot of year left, and I'd imagine you probably have some plans for it.
Yeah, definitely. So the plans are, to keep scaling up the activity, making larger deals. I kind of feel like all the foundations to do it is in place. Personally, myself, I got a few things going on, so I'm going to take a bit of a time out from my work there, and then hopefully just help other folks, other companies, people that want to learn how to utilize this as a business model within their company. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's good. It's always good to take a break and reflect sometimes, particularly when you've got some bigger projects on the way. What do you think you could share as maybe a final word of advice for the audience, whether they're just getting started or someone who's already got a portfolio?
I would say that, especially if you're doing the content side, don't be discouraged from Google updates. Those happens, those are part of the business. They're basically, a way to just, make your content better, make your websites better. Take it as a learning experience. Ever since like there was a lot of big updates over the past couple of months, we felt it too, but you can weather the storm as long as you're consistent. You kind of look at where can I improve the sites. So normally, if you just keep working, if you're consistent, then you're gonna recover. And you're gonna keep doing great at the long run. In terms of another advice for if it's someone just starting out and doesn't have previous experience, I would say that don't look at buying a website. It's kind of a shortcut to building it from scratch if you don't have like the necessary skill set in place. Take an operator you can trust, take someone that a mentor, someone that consults you, and kind of like you said, it's better to have your investment back in 4 and even 5 years, but have a really solid investment where you can feel secure, because the alternative of just trying to do everything yourself isn't really passive. It's a lot of stress. You might lose a big chunk of your investments during that time. So hire someone you can trust, hire someone that can be with you with that journey, and also aim more for a portfolio than just buying a content website as an investment. Think about like how can you diversify, how can get multiple websites that are a bit different, that in case one doesn't work that well, another one probably will, so it will kind of mitigate your risk in the long run.
Yeah, that's really important. And one of the things that is overlooked by people just getting started out is, it is not really passive. You do need somebody to be keeping a pretty close eye on things, keeping things up to date. And that's reflected in the multiples. The multiples for these assets are so low and the returns are so high because the risk is so high that they basically just become useless overnight if you don't know what you're doing. And that's
Exactly.
so a very important reminder for people that you're not going to be able to skimp on marketing and operations expenses or learn it on the fly. You will find yourself very frustrated and resenting the person who sold it to you, which isn't fair if they were honest and clear and you just didn't understand. So take the time to learn, take the time to work with people who have been there and done it. It's always better to make a little less money on the first one if you can be sure you won't lose money. And we really appreciate you sharing those tips with us. So Doron, if people want to work with you or if they want to learn more about what you're up to lately, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me through LinkedIn, go to my profile there, or through Facebook, and I'll be happy, to help any way I can.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been Doron Wolffberg. He is the head of mergers and acquisitions for yellowHEAD. This is the performance marketing agency that is now doing acquisitions to grow. Thanks a lot for sharing your insight with us today, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Domain Magnet is a leader in buying and selling online businesses with a proven track record of expertise gained from over 300 deals since 2004. To learn more about how we can help you acquire or exit a profitable online business today, head over to domainmagnet.com for more details.